Om mano na buddhi na shariram indriyam tanmatram bhutani na buddha panchakam. Aham kritas chapi virat swayupakam. Tamisham upuiti shashvatam. Om shantihi shantihi shantihi. That one attains to the Supreme Self, who dissolves body, senses, subtle body, mind, intellect, and ego, all into the Atman, the indivisible self of mankind. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Vedanta Siddhanta Nirukti Aresha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagatcha Akanda Rupa Stite Areva Moksho Brahmadvitiye Shrutaya Pramanam. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. It is the apt and final conclusion of the Vedanta that all is Brahman. Time, space, living beings, and the world, living in constant recognition of this fact is what is called enlightenment. Brahman is pure and perfect, and one without a second. And the revealed scriptures are the sure and certain proof of this fact. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvishuvahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, the reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. And the teachings are why we meet here today, the Dharma it's called, and we have been plunging into it over the last 2 weekends, starting out with teachings on Lord Buddha last Saturday. His birthday, Buddha Purnima, was upon us at that time. And then going on to 2 classes in the Taittiriya Upanishad. I'd say of all the Upanishads I've taught, of the some of the minor ones, yes, but of those 11 major ones that Shankara made commentary on, that's probably the hardest one to teach. It's unless you discount Chandogya and Aranyaka because they're so voluminous. We haven't really gone through the whole things. We've just taken parts of it. But the Taittiriya Upanishad is couched in a lot of very ancient language and things that are wonderful to recall, nevertheless, because in our particular culture in this modern time, maybe even in other cultures around the world now, a lot of these great principles have been forgotten, like sacrifice and worship and renunciation, discrimination, remembering that the world is of phenomena is all unreal, and the only reality is your divine reality, and that you are one with that. These are all things that are watchwords in spiritual life throughout the millennia and over centuries, and the seers do the greatest sacrifice called Jnana Yagya. Krishna calls it in the Gita. He calls it the greatest sacrifice if you can keep this wisdom alive and well in the hearts and minds of living beings. And that's what we engage ourselves in every time we meet, whether it's here in the SRV Oregon ashram or in the San Francisco ashram, or in the Hawaii ashram. We have 3 SRV centers, and by the way, welcome to all of those who are live streaming from there and from Europe and in India. Our widespread, far-flung sangha of sort of loose-knit sangha of SRV beings, rare as they are, who are interested in the Dharma, interested in the teachings. I would say that even interest in ethics and morals is waning as they become less important to people and rather just work and gain, name and gain, sort of take the foreground of one's life. And so if we can remember the teaching of the five sheaths, like we've been, that the Taittiriya Upanishad has been harping on, has been driving it into our minds, and then your teacher has come along and followed up with charts on it to take it just out of the Vedanta 101 periphery and place it into something of much greater import, because in the third chapter, which is soon upon us here, we're finishing up the second chapter now, the teachings of austerity and how to infill these five sheaths with Brahman, to come to know that Brahman infills them all, because we know what infills them all on the relative level, because we went through that yesterday in a sweep, and one wide sweep. So they're all of relative nature, as we were just chanting, but that absolute reality is the most difficult singular element to keep track of in your mind, and to help it introduce itself into even work. We know, for instance, they asked Holy Mother, do you remember Brahman all the time? And she said, no, how is that possible? There's this work to do. So there is the phenomena again of engaging in the external work and not really being able to keep your mind fully on God at that time. That's all right. I mean, it might be an ideal that you have, that I'm going to try and bring Brahman into everything. But it's enough if you understand that Brahman is everything, as we just chanted, time, space, living beings in the world, and then go about your work in a meticulous fashion and try not to create any karma via it. Do it in a sattvic, balanced mind whenever you do it, and refrain from it when you're restless or lazy and you make mistakes and errors that cause repercussions on you. So it's really an ideal to make your life more conscious, your work more conscious, but you must also realize that it's a two-way street. When you engage in action, Brahman sort of fades to the background, and when you, if you can, engage in Brahman, definitely work fades to the background. It's just a natural sequence of things, which is also why you need the two other yogas, just dhyanam, or raja as they call it, meditation in action, and karma, action, but you need in between those two jnanam and bhakti. The jnana particularly, bhakti is sort of a given, but the jnanam particularly is a way of keeping your mind on Brahman. Keep your mind on Brahman's teachings, on the teachings of Brahman. Like we chanted this morning after meditation, Om Shatagunam Vidyan Mananam Mananadapi Nidijasam Lakshagunam Anantam Nirvikalpakam. Where you hear the word Nirvikalpaka in Vedanta and you almost go into it. It's so profound, non-dual samadhi. But the chant says you get to it through hearing about Brahman first, and that would be via the Dharma, Sangha, and Guru, and then taking teachings on it. That would be this engaging in sadhana in the form of Jnana Yoga. And then better than that is meditating directly on Brahman. So there, right in that chant, you have this approach of Jnana Yoga to Dhyana Yoga. And in the end, then, it says, leads to Nirvikalpa Samadhi. You can detach from work and the world when it's time to, under your own auspice. You don't, not waiting for some grace or the karmic cycle to neutralize, or the gunas to fade to the back, all these philosophical principles and so forth, and waiting on those. You're preparing the ground so that eventually you will fall directly into it and possibly even be able to reach the highest station at the behest of your own will. And that's what the Upanishad said to us yesterday, and it's getting toward the teachings on austerity in the 3rd chapter. And so as a result of Varuna teaching his son, Bhrigu, they call him the great sage, he tells him about austerity, tells him about food first and how food is important and to get the pure energy going. And he tells him about austerity and said the gods attained their position because they attained austerity. They can do without, in other words. The first austerity is doing without. I mean, we looked at that when we looked at this teaching on the 7 earmarks of Brahman, of God realization. And we were finding out some of the facets of a illumined soul, what they would look like and so forth. And so we took that yesterday. So austerity was along the way of that, is that you have to not only just learn to do without, but when you can do without, find out that you feel much better without burdens. They say the yogi delights in giving away rather than receiving, because aparigraha is one of the yogic tenets, early tenets. You don't receive gifts or anything. You try and keep that at a minimum. So there are yogis, however, in the household that Krishna mentioned, householder couples that are very profound and help the society. And sometimes they're placed in the middle of these roads of commerce. Lots of money's coming to them without any effort. And when you get those kinds of people, say like our founder, like Shiksha was one of those. He was born into affluent family and married into another affluent family. So he would just go around giving his money to good causes. That's how Krishna said one of the 3 ways you redeem your gain and loss duality is by giving to charitable causes that are raising dharmic family and so forth. So he used to just give $108 checks everywhere he went, at doors of Buddhist teachings, and when the Sufis came west from Istanbul and to the Vedanta societies when he went there. So he was there at the center of these roadways of affluence without ever really handling money. So in that case, some householders are there in that, and that's given to them, and so they delight in giving away, is what I'm trying to say, not in receiving or having. They just, now that it's here and it's come of its own accord, I'll just make sure that it moves on. One of the secrets of wealth, I think, is to make sure that you don't hoard it or keep it to the self, but you let it flow, and it also gets rid of your fear of not having by doing that. Otherwise, the fear of having, of losing. There's something like 7 or 8 problems around wealth that Lord Kapila suggests in his teachings early on that have to do with gaining it and having it and spending it and hoarding it and fear of losing it and on and on. So Sri Ramakrishna used to say, you keep a bag of money in the room and you're always thinking about it, sort of like a mirror. The mind is a mirror that just reflects whatever is in its periphery. So it's good, actually, the Western society has put it all into numbers in some other bank somewhere, you see, as long as the bank's honest. And it can not think about them, but it's not enough, you see, because then they end up thinking about it and then working very hard to get it. And they can't go on retreat and can't even take a vacation, not to speak of a retreat. Pretty soon the 9 to 5 problem has become 24/7. They're working all the time without any break. And some of this, it just doesn't always have to be for money. The monks work, the Ramakrishna order work 24/7 without breaks, and sometimes they have to take breaks to get their health back because they give everything into these areas of problem. We might as well mention that now that SRV has been sending some money to Nepal because of the earthquakes there, now 2 of them. So we were there recently. I took part in helping to form the Vedanta Center of in Kathmandu, and gave a concert and a talk at that one of the halls there, which is, I don't know, probably rubble now, I'm not sure. So you can make good use then of your monetary gain and redeem it, but also keep in mind this extreme paradox between meditation and action, so that you're not too guilty. You don't feel guilty about not being able to keep your mind on God all the time. It's a natural thing. You can try and turn your work into worship, or your labor into love, is how Vivekananda put it in two very nice ways, in different parts of his talks. Work is worship, labor is love. And make sure that it's done as service of God and mankind. And he said not service of mankind, service of God and mankind. So he made that distinction too, that helps us give equally and evenly to all beings that need it. Although he did have an eye about the undeserving, the laziness and the people who are taking things that are meant for others and not doing any giving back. So that's back to sacrifice again, one of these missing elements in our society. You see, that learn to sacrifice for the right reasons. And then we find ourselves here doing the jnana sacrifice for the rishis. Yesterday morning we chanted, and during class we chanted it too, Sham no mitraha, Sham varunaha, Sham no bhavat varyama, Sham no indra brihaspatihi, one of the great 7 peace chants, which basically means salutations to all beings. And then it begins to take up the humans and the celestials and the ancestors and the gods and goddesses and the Trinity, and salutes them all every day. Not just once and forget it. You see, if you memorize it and put it in your mind and let it be expressed out into the physical atmosphere, then you're bound to remember it, and it's bound to have an effect, not only on yourself, but for the good of the ancestors and for the good of the deities and for good of the rishis and yogis who are trying to get into the body here. They have a high standard. That's why we're not seeing them born in America. We're seeing them born in India and Tibet and so forth. But they don't want to come where the Dharma is not being taught, or where there's a risk of Maya deluding the mind and falling into worldliness and so forth. These souls are looking for a place with which to do very consecrated work, a mission from God, if you want to put it that way. We're on a mission from God. So they're going to come here and they're going to want to find parents that can expose them to the Dharma. And that's all they care about. They don't care about anything else. Maybe a little bit about your suffering. But even that's easily put aside if you steep your mind in the Dharma. And that's one of the great ways. So this is what austerity is about in the mind, mental austerity. And physical austerities, we know a lot of people will fast or they'll practice silence. One of the first doorways to yoga is silence. But Sri Krishna says in the Gita, the greatest physical austerity is worship, of all things. You polish the vessels and you bow down before the altar and you light the candles and you observe the rules and you learn the mantras and you circle the images with divine incense, and you do all the ritual that goes on, and that's an austerity of the body. That's the chief austerity of the body. It's much higher than mauna and fasting. So the jnana sacrifice then has to do with studying the scriptures, svadhyaya, memorizing them, teaching them to your children or to your students, as the case may be, and trying to comprehend the meaning of what the seers say. Shankara says the hardest thing is, at first, is getting a body, human body. That's very difficult. Makes us think, like Krishna says in the Gita, there are many wombs to be born into, but we don't really think about being born into animal bodies or plant bodies or insect bodies, as if, we're human, and so how can you put a human digress back into a body like that? But nonetheless, the inference there in both Buddhism and Hinduism is that there are souls there, or the soul is manifesting there, might be a better way of saying it. The one soul is manifesting in everything, isn't it? So you make more sense out of it with non-duality, but hard hard then is to get a human birth, and the next hardest thing is to get strength when you have a body to keep it strong. Next hardest thing is to get a will to practice. Next hardest thing is to study the scriptures. And the hardest of all, to comprehend the meaning of the scriptures. There are many people who hear the scriptures once or twice and walk away, say, okay, I've been there, done that. Either they're too old, they don't apply anymore, or I understand them on the intellectual level. But beings such as myself can attest that if you spend 30 or 40 years looking deep into the scriptures, you'll get beyond the surface of intellectual understanding only, and you'll begin to not only understand the implications of the teachings, you'll begin to have experiences that go in line with them. That's called samadhi. You'll have different samadhis, wisdom samadhi, bliss samadhi. Different kinds of samadhis are there, waiting to be taken up by the enterprising soul, by the intrepid spiritual traveler. Someone who, as we were saying yesterday, begins to stop in his tracks, turn, face the original, and go back inside. Because we're left in the lurch, as I was saying yesterday, with only evolution. That's all we have here is evolution, Western science and so forth. And in the end, kind of a void. At least the Buddhists have a pleasant void at the end of the journey. We have emptiness of nothingness, but they have the emptiness of Buddha nature, you see. All the negative elements are gone. It's empty of negativity. Like two glasses, half full, put side by side. The caption over one of them is optimist glass. It's half full. But this is the Buddhist optimist glass. It's half empty. See? Buddhist optimist glass. He loves emptiness, so he's not looking at the fullness. He wants emptiness. That's to him is what I was just saying. It's nicer to give things away, even whether you have them or not, than to keep them and hoard them. And that's the way teachers feel about the Dharma. Like Milarepa said, whenever I think of the Dharma, I can't help but give it to others. And so you'll travel thousands of miles. You'll put up with all sorts of inconveniences. You'll suffer in the body. As Holy Mother said, you'll rot away in the body, because everyone's rotting away in the body. Even the avatars rot away in the body. So you'll do all that and bear that so you can transmit the teachings which save. Like the Tantras, Puranas and so forth, that which saves. They're teachings that apply to the everyday, ordinary run of human beings that stand on that precipice or in that brink of worldliness and spiritual life, like the fishermen that Christ saw. They just didn't have an internal life, what to speak of an eternal life. So he wanted to make them fishers of men and lead them on. So, but these Upanishads, they're meant for people who are really past, they've gotten off the fence. See, they've decided that the side of spirituality is where they want to go. It means they've had enough experience with the world to know Nitya Vastu Viveka, that through my discrimination, Viveka, I've come to know that there's a difference between the anitya, the changing, ephemeral, and the nitya, the immutable, the eternal, and I want the eternal. And I will do the sacrifices, and I will do the austerities, I will practice my spiritual yogas and so forth in order to get that, as that's the ultimate goal of life, or maybe penultimate goal of life. The ultimate goal of life would be God realization. So we went through teachings over the last 3 classes on the 5 sheaths, and we worked into this sloka about fear. 2 or 3 slokas in a row, they're mentioning fear. It's like the great fear. It's death, of course. And it's accompanied with doubt, and it's accompanied with, and those 2 are accompanied with ignorance. If you didn't have the ignorance, then you'd know that death is unreal, and doubt cannot cause you any doubt. You make doubt itself. You make fear afraid of itself, and you put death in its own grave. My teacher used to tell us. So those 3 things actually are the components of the curtain of nescience, the little curtain of ignorance that slides down over us, over our inner eye and our outer eyes too, whenever we come out of deep sleep and go into waking state through dream, and don't remember what we saw in deep sleep and how beautiful it was, how vast and expansive, and that all the seeds for expression were there in deep sleep. It was the formless part of our consciousness. The formless part called Brahman is very difficult to realize. Only a few seers really realize that fully. But the formless part called deep sleep isn't that hard to recognize. And you need to purify your waking state and your dreaming state, the A and U of Om, until you get to the M, which is your deep sleep state. And so you have to master your waking state and then master your dreaming state, and then you will, by doing that, acclimatize yourself to formlessness, to the bliss of formlessness, to this emptiness. And it won't just be a vacuous emptiness, or it'll be devoid of negativities first, like passions and desires and kleshas and antaryayas and so forth. And then all of a sudden, by watching the emptiness, you'll see its innate expansiveness, purnamadaha purnamidam, that it's beyond inner and outer is this fullness of Brahman, fullness of divine life. And so that A, U, and M is a triputi that assigns itself to waking, dreaming, and deep sleep state. And that's what I wanted to show first. Before we leave the subject, although we're not really leaving it as we proceed into chapter 3, we are going to shift to a different dimension of the 5 sheaths. All of you, I think, were here or have been here and know inside out probably the teaching of the 5 sheaths. That is the body, energy called prana is the second, and then manomaya kosha, the mind, is the third, intellect is the fourth, and ego is the 5th. Now somebody came up and asked me actually about ego yesterday, because we had mentioned sakshahamkara, how there was a witness to everything. There's a witness ego. I just call it an ego because there's a slight little tendril of separateness still in it, because it's witnessing something. But when witness and that which is being witnessed become one, then there's no witness anymore. So there has to be even a higher station than witness consciousness. Sakshibhutam is called in the Sanskrit. So that's not the main reason I put this up, but it happens to attend nicely on different ways of looking and according the 5 sheaths. But look at that. First you can see that there's the Deha Dhyasa Hamkara. Deha Dhyasa is one of Tantra's 16 evolutes of Maya. It means taking the body for the self, mistaking the body for the self. And anyone in here not guilty of that in their life? You may have come to know better as you grew up, but you didn't know better when you were young. Maybe you had a sort of intuition or inference about, in your mind, about there being something higher than body and money and families and all that, and you always sort of felt like you wanted freedom, and you yearned for freedom, or you yearned for God. Maybe even prayed to God when you were a little boy or a little girl. But still, the body was everything to you, and it was that to your family and your parents, and it was that to the society, and you conducted yourself around the world with it. So it became almost a natural thing that you thought of the body as yourself, and then only later. It's the same with the mind. You see, it's very confusing because you're a young kid, and if you're in the West, then you're lazy, right? And so your father tells you, use your brain, start thinking. So then you hopefully do that, and then later on in life you meet the Zen Rosh, and he says, don't use your brain, stop thinking. And so you've got this, make up your mind kind of situation. So it's true with anything. You have to try out the system, find its benefits and its defects, and take what is real and discard what is unreal. Extract the cream from the milk and leave the 2% water, like the swan is able to do with its saliva. That's why the swan in India is the Hamsa, the great white soul, pure soul. So in the Dehajasa category, you see the quote there by Vishishta. It's attached to everything, even a dented tin pot, Holy Mother says. It's fear-based ego self, which causes suffering through false identification of the Atman with the body. So then your first directive would be to separate the wheat from the chaff. It's really the first move to spiritual life, is to get discrimination. Dancing and singing and even doing mantra and so forth is ineffective, or all ineffective, if you haven't separated the wheat from the chaff. So you have to make sure of the real and the unreal, the essential and non-essential, the eternal and the non-eternal, nityo nityanam, chetanas chetananam. You make that distinction, and then you can begin on the right footing. Buddha calls that right perspective in the Eightfold Path. Now, if you were to do that, then you might get some distance from everything, into an emptiness of sorts, you see. You feel empty. If you're a worldly person, you feel empty. But if you're a spiritual person, you feel empty too. This emptiness is undesirable, and this other emptiness is very desirable, because it's free of desires. So there's that conundrum again of Maya. They sometimes describe her as taking the positive and making it seem negative, and taking what's negative and making it seem positive, taking what's real, making it seem unreal, and vice versa. So you have to work with that. That's a nut you have to crack. That's a teeth you have to cut, spiritually speaking. And painful to cut teeth through gums, as you know, from yourself and your children. So with that done, then you do get some distance, and it's an emptiness that's rather welcome. The peace that passes all understanding is sort of intimating that, although that might even be higher in Christ's view. So it's called sakshahamkara. Saksha is the witness, and I would say once you had discriminated away the 5 sheaths, as Taittiriya Upanishad is asking us to do over these last lessons, the last lessons of chapter 2, some 2 through 8, I think, we cover, asking you to discriminate away the 5 sheaths and then find out what infills them. If you've come to the intellectual sheath, you know that there's an intelligence that fills it, then it's the best reflector for Brahman. You're very close to the hound of heaven is upon the trail. You see, you're very close to the goal when your intellect is refined. And it's not the secular intellect we're talking about, which can get very dull too. It's still subject to tamas and rajas, but the refined intellect begins to get very sattvic and very balanced and very open to all true wisdom. In the sense it has discriminated out what is unreal. The unreal doesn't approach it anymore. Easily put off. See, get thee behind me, Christ said. And you're just having the fresh revelation every second, every moment. Actually, our founder, again, like Shiksha, was very much into that teaching. It has to be initiated every minute. You have to reinvest your devotion in God every hour. You have to check in every day in meditation to keep that fresh. And you will have these fresh revelations as a result. You'll live on the, as we say in Shakti land, you'll live on the edge of Mother's sword. So when Mother's sword cuts through ignorance, you'll be the first to see. And she cuts away the egotism in this case. So live on the edge of Mother's double-edged sword is a kind of a way that even the Shaivites put it. Shankara, Advaitist, Shaivite, also a mother worshipper, Tantricist. And a certain kind of Tantra was there in Shankara's line of gurus, Gaudapada, Govindapada. So they were writing songs to Bhavani and Divine Mother and so forth. At the same time, there were Shaivites with marks, and staffs and so forth, and water pot, no possessions. And then there were also Advaita Vedantas speaking this highest truth. So these are beings that naturally integrate 3 powerful paths, when a lot of other people in the world are looking around fearfully and to even set their foot on one is difficult for them. So a little bit of expansion on the Sakshahamkara. It says here, beneficent and detached witness self, which is ever existent and transcendent of the worlds of name and form. So worlds of name and form are the fullness of the worldly person. They need form, they need worlds, they need varieties, they need so much until they're just distracted away from oneness. Oneness doesn't exist for them anymore. If it does exist for them, it's a green coconut oneness, as Sri Ramakrishna used to call it. So then the passing out of the stage of deha, jasa, hamkara, then all of a sudden you find out that the worlds of name and form are empty, devoid of the ability to fulfill you. That's one. Number two, actually when you examine them through quantum physics, they are empty. They have no substance. Objects are just vibrating particles changing at a billionth of a second. And that's not a very long lifetime to live. A billionth of a second is get a live particle, you see. So you find out that it's not only actually the case that it's empty, but then through experience you find out, your ego hopefully finds out that it actually can't fulfill you in the end. So you've been seeking the unreal and thinking that that will fulfill you, and that leaves you in the lurch, especially later in life. And maybe you'll complain a little bit along the way as your old ego tries to cling on to things. Oh, I can't give up the world, it's got beauty in it, and souls I love are there, and so forth and so on. Well, that's only needs to be appended. You see, you can attenuate that thought by just thinking that all this is Brahman, all this is Brahman. Time, space, living being in the world that I have this kind of emotional attachment to. That emotional can be turned to devotional. And so Shankara says, my devotion, they accuse me of not having any devotion to God, because I'm teaching all the time in wisdom, non-dualism and all that takes away the personal God. But he says, but my devotion is actually to discrimination. I have complete devotion in me. It's applied towards separating the wheat from the chaff. And that's what I have to exemplify. Sri Ramakrishna used to often use Shankara as an example when he said the robe of a teacher, they take it on, they teach, and then mother takes it away at the end of their life and they're free. It's like a horse put out to pasture, the old horse. So the ego of a teacher has to be worn. And if you're going to transmit the Dharma, it has to be taken on. And Sri Ramakrishna didn't like it. You were just reading about it before the camera, where you welcomed the live stream audience, that they were saying how great he was. And he goes, don't say that anymore. I don't want to think about that. I just want to think about the Dharma teachings and Divine Mother of the Universe, and I'm happy and peaceful and content. And so that's this kind of emptiness we're trying to describe, you see. We're trying to attain. Walking around with all of this available to you, but not with hands off of all of it. Since it's changing, you're not going to grab onto the least little shred of it. You're just going to watch it as a beautiful picture movie goes by, and always dwell in your Atman. So that's developed to a very keen point when you say Saksha Hamkara, as the definition there, transcendent of the worlds of name and form. So you're still living in the worlds of name and form, but they have ceased to enchant you, and they've ceased to convince you that that they have any substance to them, any lasting substance to them. The only lasting substance is an essence, Swarupa. And you talk about having realization in one fell swoop. Actually, you should have realization in one fell Swarup. So you should see the essence and quit looking for the substance. Same with your experiences. You're looking for a substance of your experiences, but they're just constantly coming and going. And you're not able to extract any essence from them. So it would be all essence if you had this higher perspective. But it's no essence without it. And then it's false substance here, and it becomes, feigned substance here that you're looking at from a distance, and then it's all substance, all essence when you get to this. It's called Paramahamkara. Of course, when you hear the word para in Sanskrit, it means supreme. highest and best and so forth. So definition there is Supreme Self, which reveals the cohesive unity between the Atman, living beings, and the worlds. So again, what I was saying, you have a little bit of emotional investment in beings. You have a little bit of attachment to the worlds. You think, oh, they're fine even if they're unreal. You see, I want to still keep them. So maybe you're keeping a little bit of delusion in your head by doing that. Whereas the Swami or the Roshi or the Rinpoche or the rabbi or the priest down the street is completely convinced that the worlds are unreal, that man has no place to lay his head here, and has accepted that long ago. But still are reaching a place in realization where they will see that the Atman and the living beings and the worlds are all one thing. That's not a green coconut oneness, that's a ripe coconut oneness. Because there's a core in the middle of the coconut that rattles around when you shake it, and then there's 5 layers when it's ripe that surround it. Milk, meat, copra, outer shell, inner shell, outer shell. I've seen it because my Labrador dog tears one apart on the beach in Hawaii when I was younger. Just tear that thing apart, work hours on getting to the inside of that coconut, shredding it right there. So you could see all the layers as the Labrador's teeth uncovered them, you see. So it was ripe, and there was a kernel inside Atman that rattled around independent from the other layers, you see. That's the 5 sheaths in the Atman. So if you're speaking about Paramahamkara from the standpoint of the Atman, it's like what we're approaching now. We've looked completely at the 5 sheaths over the last 6 or 7 hours of class, 2 classes, 3 classes now. And we've seen that they're all filled with relative things, changing things, ephemeral things. And many of them are problematic. Some of them are rather neutral. But then as we get closer and closer to the teaching of Bhrigu's father in the 3rd chapter, we're finding out that food is Brahman, and then energy is Brahman, then mind is Brahman, then intellect is Brahman, and then ego is Brahman. Here's Brahman, ego is Brahman right here, see. So you had to go through it all and negate it in order to be able to accept it. That's kind of a summation of it all. It's iti iti turning into neti neti. I'm sorry, opposite. Reverse that. It's neti neti, not this, turning into iti iti, all this, all this. And people think they can jump to iti iti without doing this analysis. Say, well, if they've done it in another lifetime, I'll give it to you, you see. But if not, all sorts of errors and mistakes are being made, and karma is being accrued, and you're back again in another lifetime wondering what the hell happened, you see. Hang upside down. Your mantra is wah, wah, wah. And your first experience is pain. So, rather instead coming into the body consciously after a conscious death is kind of the ideal. That's in Zen, that's the first of 5 types of Zen, is escaping the chain of birth and death. So 4 other types of Zen are higher than that. See? So getting off the wheel of birth and death is kind of a, well, yeah, of course you should do that kind of teaching. Yawn, oh, you're still working on that? So, but then, the other types of Zen are telling you that there's a distinction between the world and God, and then pretty soon they're one, and then pretty soon there's neither. See, the highest type of Zen, it's a kind of shunyata or oneness that's just void of two-ness. How can you say it? There's no separate onlooker, you see. It's all just the hailstone is dissolved in the ocean. The game's over forever, for good. And it's realized that it was a game, too, along the way. It was just a game. It was just a play, a dream. It was a mass collective mental dream with a lot of power in it. So you became even more powerful to transcend it. First is strength, body, right? Then strength, then will. Then understand the message of the scriptures and put them to practice. And the scriptures are the word of God. They're the seers, and their experience all culminated in what exists in India is not just one scripture and one prophet, but dozens and hundreds of each, all corroborating each other's view. Father of yoga, father of Vedanta, father of Samkhya, father of Buddhism. You go through, that's all I've been teaching for 22 years here, is this well-developed ideology of India, which is based on unimpeachable spiritual axioms, laws, maxims of the soul. I'd say that, like non-transformation and non-birth, non-death, those are, if you reach that and begin to contemplate it, then that is taking the scriptures, hearing about it from the seers, and then contemplating it. Oh yes, and then you're back. You see, right to the highest type of Zen experience. You're in Satori, see, and all the stages have been realized. You know all of the sheaths, all 5 of them. You know all of the worlds, ancestors, gods, Trinity, and if you ever did have to take a trip to world again, you could do it consciously and leave it consciously, knowing that it was a dream. So it's masterful soul. So there are masters, and then there are past masters. And those past masters are the most facile at entering into bodies and leaving it. Say maybe 14 times, like Dalai Lama, or like Swami Vivekananda, once every 1,000 years. Sharda Devi used to say, oh, Naren, that's Vivekananda's pre-monastic name. He's a soul that, once he leaves the body, sits in meditation, samadhi, for 700 years at a time. Okay. And that 700 years is exactly the time between Shankara and Chaitanya and Ramakrishna, and before Shankara back to Father of Yoga, and before him back to Christ and Buddha. So these beings sit, they leave like this, sit like this, and then they come. You usually see them sort of like this. They're in one position, ekasana. And how do they move? How do they think? How do they eat? How do they walk? How do they sleep? Just as if like everyone else, but in one state of consciousness all the time, not shifting. When the body shifts, the mind doesn't shift with it, you see. When the intellect thinks about something, the Atman stays in its own pristine knowledge and considers what the intellect's presenting to it. But for the ordinary people, whatever the senses are conveying, the brain believes. See? We had that sloka here yesterday. It's all based on sense life, sense experience. Big mistake. If you wanted to base everything on the senses, then become a cat. So you can see in the dark, you see. You can't see in the dark now. Or an owl, see. Or a dog that can hear things miles away. Then you've got your supreme senses, you see. But what body have you taken on to get them? See. You're eating dog food instead of caviar. Although I'm sure a dog would eat caviar. So these teachings of the 3 egos I present to you, because it was questioned after class yesterday by one student. And seeing the distinction between Sakshi and Parama is very, very fine. It's almost indistinguishable. We can only try and describe it, and the seers also try and tell us, but you can only sort of envision it by knowing that when you're in your supreme state, there's no two. That's why they sometimes call Brahman not two. You say, Brahman's one. Your teacher says, no, don't limit it like that. You can say it's not two, I'll accept that. You see. So it's to be experienced, as they say. Now the rest of this chart, coming from that story of Bhima, Basa, and Dridha in Yoga Vashishta, Sri Ram asks Vashishta in it, what is the nature of ahamkara? And so that's why this is what Vashishta relates to him in the scripture. You can read it yourself there. I've done a condensed version of Yoga Vashishta myself for modern times. Now, there you see across the top of the rest of this chart, the body, the condition, the sheath or kosha, the state, and the identity of these Tripudi teachings. We can look at them quickly so that this will end our 5-sheath examination as far as deep as we have taken it with the Taittiriya Upanishad. So there you see the bodies are gross, subtle, and causal. When I chanted this morning, Om mano na buddhi na shariram na indriyam na tanmatram na bhuta panchakam. And then I went on to say, aham kritas chapi viyat swarupakam. So all of those listed there are body and then senses. Then subtle body, the sharira, it says. Sharira is right there, that word. And then the tanmatras are the subtle elements, and of course the body and senses are the gross elements and gross senses. And then the mano na buddhi na hamkara. So that that's mind and intelligence. I mean, Vashishta taught that, and then later on Shankara put it in this way. Om mano buddhi amkara chitani naham nacha shrutra jiuve nacha grana netre nacha vyoma bhumir na tejo na vayu chirananda rupa shivoham shivoham. That's how Shankara starts out his Nirvana Shatakam, 6 verses on Nirvana. The very first verse, Mano Buddhya Hamkara. I'm not the mind, nor Buddhya, intellect, nor Hamkara, ego. Chittani Naham, nor am I my thoughts, Chitta. And then he goes on and lists all of those that are listed here. But so, not the body, or the subtle body, Sharira. And if you want to know what the Sharira consists of, there's a gross Sharira, a subtle Sharira, and a causal Sharira. So don't have Elmer Fudd teach you this. So wirwa. It's a hard enough word in Sanskrit. If you have a speech defect, it's going to be worse. But Sharira is hard enough to pronounce, but it's because you have to roll the R's in Sanskrit once, not like a Spanish R. So you don't want to teach a Spanish man to teach you Sanskrit either, probably. Sound like a bullfight or something. So the Sharira is your physical body, your subtle body, and your causal body. So you can say that in words, but you have to know that there are ancient Sanskrit terms that have been known from time out of mind that refer to those stations. Your Sharira, your threefold Sharira. And Vashishta used them in Yoga Vashishta quite a bit when he was teaching the young teenage Sri Ram, who was at the time under the press of suffering. That is, he saw suffering in the world like Buddha did. And actually Buddha reenacted this thousands of years later. So like Ram and Buddha were the same person, both born in rich families with kings, as their fathers, and both left the kingdom and saw suffering and gave up the world. And so Ram is under the press of that first view of suffering, what Buddha called the 4 signs when he left his father's palace. First he saw a diseased man, then he saw an old man, then he saw a dead corpse they were burning on the pyre, and then he saw a monk. And those were his 4 signs that the Divine Mother just lit up for him when he went out of the palace. You see, it's a sign of an avatar-born soul, an avataric descent. Is that other people would have seen that and maybe just got depressed. See, but he saw it and they were like, "Look at this! Whoa, look at that! Now see this! Now see that!" See? And it's like little lights were put on those things, and they became known as the 4 great signs. So there is suffering, was Buddha's first noble truth around it. You see, he saw it. And his first look at it after leaving the opulence of his family life and world, the Sakya clan, which was so rich, was that those 4 signs and how it made him feel. Compassion for suffering, basically. Not just depression, like I can't do anything about it, but I have to find a way. And the 4-fold path, 4 noble truths were the way, and then the 8-fold path was the 4th of those. Right perspective and right livelihood and things like that. great teaching, Lord Buddha, there. So the sharira, you have to know that your gross body, and then, your subtle body. If you want to look back in yesterday's thing, this is your gross body here. And your subtle body consists of these three. And the causal body is a kind of an overlap between this and Anandamaya Kosha. And so that's why we are putting the koshas next. There you see them across the board. You see kosha or sheath. You could also call them upadi or sharira. So there's different words in different climes and times of Indian subcontinent that concentrated on this teaching. They wanted to make it really clear to you. And the whole overall general instruction around it is, you are not this. I mean, if that became obscured over time, then in 700 AD, Shankara came, listed everything from unmanifested Prakriti all the way down to the element earth. And at the end of that, in the Vivekachudamani, he said, that's your non-self. See? It's very, very striking if you take it sloka by sloka and study it. Unmanifested Prakriti means seed form of everything. Where everything goes when it so-called dies or so-called gets destroyed is back to its seed. And it'll just come forth again. So there's no birth and no death, ever. There's no creation and no destruction, ever. If you're attached to the physical, you think there is. But when you lift off of that, Sakshahamkara and Paramahamkara, then you know that it's just all cycles. And then next thing is you want to get off those cycles. You want freedom from cycles. And the next thing is, I can be free from cycles and also enter into them free. You see, it gets better and better and better, you see. Past masters. So, with the five sheaths all infilled with Brahman, then is the kind of the ultimate teaching. And so you have to put these into your three bodies. And they also go with the AUM of Om. And they also go with your waking, dreaming, and deep sleep state. That's the next Triputi there. And they also go with your identity. Vaishvanara, Taijasa, and Pragya is how the Upanishads describe them, the Vedas. Basically, first out here is your outer body, which is the Stula Sharira, which is your Annamaya Kosha, and you're in the waking state. And what are you there? What's your identity? Enjoyer of objects. It would be fine if you could enjoy them without owning them, possessing them, or getting attached to them. It would be fine. You're walking around in that sort of knowledge that this, wheat and the chaff. And so they come and they go. Wealth, family, kids, money, relationships, whatever. You may find an end to all of that, movement of that, and just settle your whole situation. You see, a monk does that. But a householder should be able to do that too. And if he or she does, then a monkish soul might come to them. You see, a renounced soul, a higher soul will come and say, oh, we'll take birth in that womb. It'll be a womb with a view, as we say, you see. Sorry. So that's very important for conscious life, conscious death. It bridges on eternal life, as we said. Now, if you say my subtle body is the sukshma sharira, and it consists of these sheaths of energy, sheath of mind, and sheath of intellect, then it's when I'm in my dreaming state that those three are really more apparent. In the waking state, you don't think, why am I raising my arm? You don't think, why am I seeing? See, because there's an eye and there's a power of the eye to see, and power of the ear to hear, but you don't really discriminate between those two. But the prana sheath is operating here in the physical realm, and it infills the annamaya kosha, the food kosha, and you'll find a direct correlation between food and life force. Good food, good life force. Bad food, not so good life force. See, eating poison or eating nectar, as we say. Holy Mother's teaching about pure food gives you pure blood, and pure blood gives you pure thought, and pure thought gives you pure mind. And then gives you Atman, all is Brahman, exactly what we observed and learned yesterday from the lessons 2 through 6 or 7 of chapter 2 that we looked at. We're not really cracking the book yet because this is all kind of putting a capper on this. So if you're in the causal body, we didn't finish. So these 3 sheaths are rather obscure to you in your waking state. So in the dreaming state, you'll be more in knowledge of them, hopefully. You'll know that when you go into dream, if you take your consciousness with you, that it's the prana that's moving your mind's consciousness to another state. And it's what's missing, Vivekananda said, mostly in America and the West, is they don't know the prana yet. And neither do they know the psychic prana. Psychic prana is even higher than the mukhya prana, the healthy prana. So this inward moving prana through nerves is just like outward moving prana through physical nerves. You've got your subtle body and your gross body, right? They both have hundreds and thousands of nerves. But you don't know about your subtle body, and that those inside of each, the way they explain it is inside of each gross nerve there's 100,000 subtle nerves that when you dissect the gross nerve you can't see or detect with anything. But that's spiritual life. That's the beginning of spiritual life, you know. Man does not live by bread alone, he told the fisherman. So you're going to have to open up these inner channels. The yogis in India had known about them for thousands of years and called them nadis. And they knew the breath was connected to them. That deep breath and watching your breath and evening out your breath was akin to being sattvic, being balanced mind, right? Enlightenment, even-mindedness, one of the signs of a yogi, see. And mind never changes. No choices there. Choices have all been made. I was living with my teacher, you know, till he was in his 90s, and we went to see him quite often. He never changed. See? I'm sure some people would come there and say, he must live a very boring life. You see. There's no choices there. He doesn't own anything. He doesn't have money. He doesn't know where his next meal's coming from. He doesn't have family, and you know, on and on and on. So it must be really boring, you know. But he's living in this emptiness, which is peace, which is bliss, which is enlightenment. It's one of the signs of an enlightened person. We have to understand that about those souls. And if you spend enough time with them, then you'll catch their fire. He used to say that to us. And one of my Sangha members was sitting near Swami once, and Swami leaned over and said, "Get closer to the fire." And my brother Sangha member didn't know what that meant. But later on it was explained to him, come closer to Swami. See? Get as close as you can to him, learn what he knows, and get the transmission from him. It's important. That's why you're here. He had no family or wife anymore. He was a householder, very old. Get closer to the fire. So this fire of yoga, Vivekananda called it. So my point here being, you don't really know about your pranamaya kosha, manamaya kosha, and vijnanamaya kosha except in dream. And if you awaken it, then of course your dreams will become radiant meditations. That's a line out of a song of India. A man has come to me from a land that never sleeps. Now all my dreams have been turned into radiant meditations. My teacher liked that song very much. And then, of course, the Anandamaya Kosha is causal body. Why is it causal body? Because it's, as I was explaining yesterday, your first move to separate yourself from Brahman. You made yourself into a separate I, and that was your doing. You decided to sequester yourself out from the whole, create a little separate I, have a separate intellect, have a separate mind, have a separate body and senses, and have a separate existence. It's all separation. You'll get tired of that pretty soon. You get tired of saying hello to your loved ones and goodbye to your loved ones when they're born and when they die. You don't want that anymore. Too painful, see. So you'll just say, one state, please. Mm-hmm. You'll go to the Lord Brahma, the Creator God, and say, creation is actually very amazing, but take it back. I've been in your bath. I'm clean. I want to get out. You see. If you stay in the bath too long, what happens? Wrinkles. What does that mean? old age over and over and over again, you see. And the same experiences over and over and over again. You want to know your true self, which is ever fresh, ever free, never bound, joyous, blissful, peaceful. We dream about it, you see. But it's also beyond our dreams in our deep sleep state. And that's why these three come next. You're in your gross body, in the stula sharira, in the sheath of food, you're in the waking state. And with these three, you're in the dreaming state. And with these three, you're in the deep sleep state. If you go beyond your deep sleep state, then you get into what's called Turiya, or the fourth state. What's beyond the beyond. It's beyond seeds, in other words. Your deep sleep state still has seeds in it, right? Because you come back out to waking with them. And you do that not just in 24 hours, but you do that in a lifetime, and 24 lifetimes, and so forth. So you're constantly watering these seeds and coming into form again. And you haven't burnt them over the fire of knowledge yet. If you heat the seeds over the fire of knowledge, they won't sprout anymore, Sri Ramakrishna said. So at one point in one lifetime, you're going to heat the seeds of the causal body, and this will be your last lifetime. That means in ignorance. You could come back again free of ignorance, but you'll not have another ignorant lifetime. Ignorant of your true nature, we mean. So that's a very precious teaching, sort of giving us impetus to purify all states, waking, dreaming, and deep sleep state, and see what's beyond them. So in your deep sleep state, all the seeds are there, but you could see the light beyond them. And you could cook those seeds, and they won't sprout anymore, and you can then get into your nirvikalpa state, the samprakata state, seedless. So this teaching I wanted to give you with this chart, which is, so what is it? Something like one of the earliest of all of Vedanta charts that we have. Now, at that point, with that done, we can pick up from the scripture, chapter 2, in the time remaining. Remember, we had just reached lesson 7 in chapter 2. And the sloka, I'll repeat it. In the beginning, this was indeed non-being. All of this was non-being. From that, verily, being sprang up. That in itself assumed a self. Therefore it is called self-made or well-made. That Brahman truly is the flavor which is the essence of existence. Surely by grasping that flavor, the individual soul becomes blessed. Who indeed would breathe, who would remain alive if this bliss were not in the ethers? You didn't have that bliss of Brahman inside you. Who would live? Who would breathe? Indeed, it is that and that alone that causes blessedness. The individual soul becomes fearless only when it obtains a firm and peaceful ground in that invisible, selfless, unutterable, supportless reality. Whenever it assumes the smallest interval in the state of identity, then it has fear. Nice, huh? You ever think yourself separate from Brahman? That's where fear comes in. The fear of death, mainly. But know yourself to be one with the eternal, birthless, deathless Brahman, then you don't have that fear. And you see the seers living in that kind of fearlessness. Dalai Lama once actually told me in person, because I was playing music for one of his talks, we Tibetans look forward to the day of our death. We Tibetans look forward to the day of our death. So it's not something that they're running away from. It's not something they're necessarily anticipating either, but like Holy Mother said, even the Ishvar Kojis are rotting away in the body. And what are you doing here? See? Is what you're doing adding anything to your soul? But what you're doing may be taking away from your cognizance of the soul, on the other hand. So you want to live in full consciousness. You know how it was put. They asked Swami Vivekananda after he had taught this for some months in the West. Somebody came up and said, so the gist of this is that we're all Brahman. And so I have one question for you. Should a man be reborn, given this? And Swamiji said, I certainly hope he will not. Not until he can do so in full consciousness. So, again, the first kind of Zen, get off the wheel of birth and death. But later types of Zen, that's not a problem anymore. You can come and go as you will. knowing that you're none of the five sheaths or the five elements or the ego or even the saksha hamkara. You're even beyond that. A witness. You're beyond the witness. Your true state, your natural state. That is why even a wise man has fear when he is not reflective. I outlined something here to read to you in the commentary which tickled me, because it reminded me of my own upbringing in a Western family, materialistic family. Yeah. So there's this sage called Rasaba, and he entered his household one day and said, "Dear children, having taken a human birth, you ought to engage yourself in holy tapas, austerity, by which your mind will become stainless, and you will obtain the supreme bliss of Brahman. It does not befit one to abandon oneself piggishly to sense enjoyments, having gotten a human birth." Imagine your father coming in, saying that to you. You're sitting around watching TV and eating. Yeah. You worthless people, you see. It does not befit you to do this. You should rather engage in tapas, austerity, and get that supreme bliss of Brahman. See, so Holy Mother used to say that. Some of the women of her village were having like 20 children, 21, 22 children. She said, it's a piggish existence. You have like 20 children and you lose 2 or 3 of them and you suffer horribly because of the death, yet you go on having more. See. So it's a consideration you might want to make, I mean, it's even in our hippie songs of the 60s, right? Teach your children well. What does it mean to teach your children well? It means to give them the Dharma early on, to save them from rebirth. And you won't find these teachings, you'll find them only peculiar to or particular to Hinduism and Buddhism. That's where you'll find them. In every other religion is pretty much live a life and so forth. Well, that's okay if you live a moral and ethical life, but you must know that there is a dharmic life, and there's a divine life, and there's an eternal life, and that it's beyond everything relative. See, the further away you go from the world, the closer you get to Brahman. The further you go towards the world, the further away you get from Brahman. That's how Sri Ramakrishna put it. So, do you want to be close to Brahman? You want to be close to your true self? Tantra put that very nicely when it said, Swarupa Nyata Bhava and Swarupa Pratista. You see, in one fell Swarup, right? So Swarupa Nyata Bhava means running away from your true essence all the time. There are people who make it a profession to run away from their true self. I'm not condemning it. I think there are people who like to hide themselves in the worst circumstances and get out. See? Sort of makes it more fun. Oh, look what I did, you see. But it's all dreaming and ego life, you see. But then there are those Swarupa Pratita who decide, I'm just going to stay in my essence. Pratista means to be stable. I'm just going to stay in my essence. And all the time, and see if I can manage that, you see. I won't run away from anything. I'll face it on. I'll be it. So yes, having taken a human birth, my children, you ought to engage yourself in holy tapas. So it's not just mowing the lawn once in a while for your parents or taking out the trash, you see. But you're in there practicing your meditations and studying the scriptures and serving God and your parents and that kind of thing. Increasing your devotion to God. I remember talking to my mother about God when I was very young. She said, I'll teach you a prayer, she said. So, taught me a prayer. And then I used to say it for a while when I was a boy. But then, pretty soon it seemed silly. So, oh, please save me and save my brothers and save my sister and save my parents. They don't need saving. They got themselves in their own mess. Let them get out. See? And I'm also in that mess, and I need to get out. In fact, that's what Buddha and Ram did. They got themselves out of the mess by leaving their parents, and then they came back and gave them away when they were free. You can't help somebody if you're in the same predicament they are. In India they say, you don't have enough room in your own bed for yourself, and you're asking other people to lay in it, right? So you need to see, like in prison. Let's see, a couple days ago I was there, up in Madras, Oregon, and there's a a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna in the prison. It was, got into some trouble. It's a minimal security prison, so nothing great. But basically then he came up to me and said, look at this, and he showed me a picture of my teacher, Swami Sheshananda, who was also his teacher. And beautiful. I said, well, I've never seen this picture. It doesn't look like any of the ones I've ever seen taken. He said, that's because it was drawn by one of the inmates here. I gave him a picture of my guru, and he drew this. So I looked closely, and it was just so lifelike, just masterful done. So you can have that. That's a copy. So you'll see it on the chart soon. Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj's Key Teachings or something. So anyway, my point for bringing that up is that he had Swami wearing a cap, which he would never do. He wore some sort of a hat sometimes on the beach and so forth, but it was a kind of a cap, and on it was the insignia of the Ramakrishna order, which has, you've seen it, right, in color. Swamiji masterminded it. It's got the wavy ocean of karma, and it's got the swan, the peaceful soul sitting on. It's got the sun of Jnana Yoga rising in the background. And, so it's this whole beautiful logo, as it were, that Ramakrishna order got from Swamiji. So anyway, then there's a little inscription underneath it. You see, Atmano moksharta hitai jagad moksharta jagad hitaya cha. Atmano moksharta jagad hitaya cha. So that means Atmano moksharta, realization of the Atman, jagad hitaya cha, and helping the world. So you must get your realization first, and then you must help the world. The blind can't lead the blind. So that's one of the mistakes we make. It's even there in altruism, although altruism's a nice turn of a refreshing turn of things away from selfishness, no doubt. But there are stories in our tradition where people would go to Ramakrishna or to Brahmananda or others and say, talk a big streak, you see, how they're going to help Calcutta and put new sewer systems in and help the poor and this and that, and raise dispensaries and, distribute medicine and all that. So they would go on talking like this, and then they'd stop and look at the Swami and see what he said, if they had impressed him yet, you see. And Swami Brahmananda just looked at the man and said, my goodness, what did God do before you were born? So it's really, God is the doer. The human being thinks he does, but it's Mother's work. And if you know that and adopt that attitude, then of course she'll get behind you and make your work successful, otherwise not. So in that way, you have this nice saying of Rasabha about his children, lighting a fire under them, the fire of yoga. Do some austerity, don't just sit around and rot away in the body. Make something of yourself, spiritually speaking. Now let's go on to the next sloka, because it still harps on this, or not harps yet, but it brings in this element of the fear that comes when there's a slightest sense of separation. This would be then lesson 8, where it says, out of fear of Brahman the wind blows, through fear of Brahman the sun rises, through fear of him Agni, Indra, and death, the fifth, speed along. So Agni, of course, is fire, Indra is the god of the gods, and death is Yama. And so I wanted to show you again the Curtain of Nescience teaching. I've double named it there, Curtain of Nescience and Cloud of Unknowing. Don't confuse it with the Christian document Cloud of Unknowing in the 14th century or so, I think, where they were talking about the intimacy of communion with Christ. It was a very beautiful movement that was going on at that time in Christendom. And the Bible wasn't the ultimate go-to place for that. They had this new doctrine called Cloud of Unknowing. And you got into deep, intimate union with Christ inside of yourself through this doctrine. But it did have to do with getting over some conventional beliefs and going beyond conditionings and so forth. So the Buddhists began to have teachings that reflected the Cloud of Unknowing. They had it in terms of more like Vedanta has it, Curtain of Nescience style. So in the Tantras, there's references to curtain of nations. Of course, it's the way I've translated it into English, but it means a sort of veil of not knowing that's going on all the time. And it can't be, you can't put your finger on it, just like you can't put your finger on these koshas in the working state. Like I say, you move your arm, but you're not thinking, gee, why does my arm move, you see? Or why does my eye see, you know? You don't go that deep usually and analyze everything, and which you should in Vedanta. You should connect earth to smell, and water to taste, and fire to sight, and air to touch, and hearing to ether. You got to connect the 5 elements to the 5 senses in order to have a yogic start in this path. Because look at the opposite way. You've disconnected yourself from the 5 elements of nature. You're trying to master them. You're trying to dominate over nature. You're trying to use it for pleasure, and you're polluting it in the meantime. The environment's going bad, you see. So the whole thing is wrong. It's a wrong approach. You should be meditating on that and holding them sacrosanct. There's a god of earth. There's a, Sita. One of the students took initiation last night at Shodasi Puja here in our shrine room. And it's got the name Sita. That means goddess of earth. So there's a god of earth. There's a god of water. There's a god of fire. There's a god of ethers, and a god of air. Vayu, the wind. So you're not respecting them? You might say they're old names for old gods, they don't apply anymore. But earth, air, fire, water, and ether didn't change. They're the same now as they were then, maybe a little more polluted, you see. But ether is just misunderstood. You never understood ether. And isn't that just what we read, you see, about who would indeed breathe and who would remain alive if this bliss were not in the ethers? So is there much bliss here in this ether? Or is there a lot of suffering and a lot of strife and a lot of stress and a lot of pain, a lot of struggle? You see, where's the peace in the ether? Where's the bliss? See, it's in these other ethers: the prana ether, the mind ether, the intellect ether, and the ego ether, and an ether that's beyond all ethers called Chiddakasha. It's the space of pure spirituality inside of you. It would be Atman, or Paramahamkara if you wish. So there are 5 ethers. You've only looked at one of them, and from there you're going outward, see, to try and find out if there's anything outside of that ether. There's nothing more outside of it. You're at the bottom of the ladder when you see earth. Earth is your thought solidified. The whole earth is the thought solidified of the ancestors, but then, that's the earth as a planet. But what about the earth as an element? Dirt, soil, clods, rocks. Those are your thoughts too. They came about through your thinking process. God didn't create them, and nature couldn't have done it without you being insentient. So these are your own projections, as we say. So you should be treating them reverently, because by disrespecting them, you're harming yourself. I mean, do you have to wait for thousands of years of polluting the earth to find that out? That you're really harming yourself when you're harming your own thoughts, your own thought projections? Or can you right now start worshiping the God of earth, air, fire, water, and ether, make amends with them, and become one? You see, you don't want to be one with nature in the old sense, because nature is where birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death happen. It's not that you want to become one with that part of nature. But as Maha Pancha Bhutas, the 5 great elements that are the thoughts of God, you want oneness with that. In other words, you want to know that all of that came out of you. You're the living God that all of that came out of. There's no God anywhere that, other than you, that has done that. And you means billions of you, which are all connected by one consciousness, the thread running through the pearls. So all of this is in the Advaita philosophy, it's in the Vedanta philosophy, it's in Tantra as worship of deities, worship of elements, worship of principles. It's in yoga when you practice. And of course it's at the foundation of Jainism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and all the darshanas of India, and probably at the root of all religions. If you look enough, you will find it. So again, out of fear of Brahman the wind blows, through fear of Brahman the sun rises, through fear of Brahman the gods of fire, the lord of the gods Indra and Yama speed along, make their movement, you see. So after the break we will look at that fear right here as one of the elements of the curtain of nescience, and we'll know what's then falling down. In fact, I can leave you with this final word about it. Lord Shiva says here, in the Tantras, makes this astute mention. The luminaries have determined that the curtain of nescience consists of fear, doubt, and ignorance, and is maintained and thickened due to the mind's brooding on the effects of these three primal causes. If you want to look for primal causes of things that are there in the pranamaya, manamaya, and vaganamaya kosha, you'll find it in fear of death, ignorance of your true nature, and doubt about the essence, the existence of Brahman. See, that all existence is Brahman, as we just read. Doubt about that. And so it's not so, you might think, oh, curtain of nescience, that's too diaphanous, I can't really plumb the depths of that. It's actually very simple. It's just your fear, doubt, and ignorance is there. And it will thin if you don't brood on it. But if you brood on it, see, then it thickens that curtain. And people are brooding on it all the time, by the millions. Fear of death, for instance, was just the first fear. So let's take our break here for 10 or 15 minutes. The live streaming audience can look at this ahead of time on the screen, and we will meet again after a little refreshment and breather. Pranayam, breather. Aloha, namaste. And we are off. Svagatam, welcome back to the precincts of Holy Company where Guru, Dharma and Sangha meet. We try and do this quite a few times a week at our ashrams. Saturday, Sunday definitely. We have a Wednesday night class taught by one of our advanced students, and we also have worship on Saturday night. Puja, it's called. Like last night we worshipped Falaharini Puja and Shodashi Puja on the same day. It was very auspicious. And then we have our morning meditation every morning at 6, like clockwork here with those who come. So you're all welcome to that here in Portland, and people who find out about us on the live streaming can also join in with us and celebrate this sadhu satsanga, this and the Dharma, the teachings of Brahman, about Brahman in the atmosphere of interested and committed people. And we'll find teachings like the 5 sheaths being broadcast there at Vedanta centers. It's like Vedanta 101, as we've been saying, but we've seen that it goes very deep and can be looked at from many sides now, as they say, and that we have just finishing up by looking at the correlations, triputis they're called, with the waking, dreaming, deep sleep state in your 3 shariras, or body sets, physical body, a subtle body, and causal body, which, again, those last 2 which we're not very aware of, like pranamaya kosha, manomaya kosha, and vijnanamaya kosha. We can just say basically there's body and mind and emotions, but until we really look into them, then we're only sure of the body and the senses. Thought has a sort of place somewhere, and energy has a place somewhere, but we don't really know where. But when we contact it and connect it to ourselves, all aspects of our being, as is said, then we become more holistic. That's really a word that was on the mind of Lord Vishishta in the earliest times, and also on the mind in more contemporary times of the father of yoga, Patanjali, who taught about healing at all levels of our being. And obviously Shankara, we just sang that verse of the Nirvana Shatkam, is thinking about it too, but it's thinking about it in terms of non-identification, that like the father of yoga said, the seer must retract itself from the seen in order to know itself as different from the seen. In other words, as I've been saying lately, it's not enough to know just who you are, or to ask, who am I, but you have to know what you're not. In fact, quite often you have to know what you're not in order to know who you are. So you have to do that process of elimination, which is so famous in Vedanta, and really in Buddhism too. And in Yoga and Samkhya, no doubt. Lord Kapil listed the 24 cosmic principles, many of which are elements of the 5 sheaths, early on, so that we could detach from them, separate the wheat from the chaff. So in terms of the Taittiriya Upanishad, we just read those 2 slokas, which are talking to us about fear, bringing that in. Now, here's a 3rd sloka that is lesson 9. We're really approaching the end of chapter 2 here. And chapter 3 is short, so the Portland Sangha ought to be through with the Taittiriya Upanishad by the end of the summer visit, I think, and starting up a new Upanishad. But this 3rd sloka, in this vein of that flavor, that suggestion of fear creeping in, states it this way: that from which all speech with the mind turns away, not being able to reach it, knowing the bliss of that Brahman, man fears nothing. So now they put it in a positive. They couch it in positive terms. If you have that separation from Brahman lurking in your mind, in your koshas anywhere, in your consciousness, then there is fear. But if you follow those doorways to yoga through speech and silence and mind, silence of mind and speech, you might say, then you'll reach that bliss of Brahman and you'll fear nothing. Verily the thought, why have I not done the right thing? Or, why have I done wrong? Does not, of course, torment such a one. So that's where morality and ethics don't really torment a person. They've already learned the yamas and niyamas of yoga, non-violence, non-stealing, so forth. And so they don't have that accompanying them anymore. But that one who is the comprehensor in the manner described here redeems itself from both these thoughts. So you take your mind away from duality. For truly, that one who knows this redeems himself from both. Such is the secret instruction. And it's also echoed in the very last sloka of this whole Upanishad. Such is the secret doctrine, the secret instruction. So it's that secret of oneness they're talking about. And otherwise, and to get rid of the subtler shades of it, we look at the curtain of nescience. Here's a description of Sri Ram as he listened to Lord Vashishta's instruction on this. As Ram listened carefully, Lord Vashishta spoke of Udalaka and how he pierced the curtain of nescience. Quote, mere wisps of thoughts occurred in his mind, but he dissolved them on the spot. When the subtle tendency towards vikalpa arose, that's thoughts with desire, he quelled them immediately. Soon even the darkness that gathered indicative of primal ignorance was overcome by his non-dual mental stance, and he came upon them and beheld a great light. Amazed, he pierced through that as well, along with the dizziness which came from gazing on it. Thus the stage of darkness and light was transcended. I don't think I've ever heard a sloka, a teaching like Vashishta gives there. You might hear beyond dark and light, but you think of the great light. And so you pierce through the curtain of nescience, and behind it is this great light. Some people catch a glimpse of that, but in terms of the highest realization, gazing upon that light makes you rather dizzy, makes you tendency maybe to go unconscious, like looking straight at the sun for a while. So he pierced through that dizziness and the light itself and realized what was beyond darkness and light. It's a very beautiful teaching and going towards a sort of ultimate non-duality. So I culled that out from Lord Vashishta's scripture and put it here with the curtain of nescience as it fits so well. On this chart is a basic piece of artwork that was granted to us to use by in Ramnan's collection. And so I saw it and I added a few things to it, but basically you can see this Devi, Sri Devi there, kind of looking through the curtain of light, curtain of nescience rather, towards all beings. And then the whole sort of cross-section of humanity and angels and ancestors and gods and all these beings brooding on what they have, what they don't have, what they might gain, what they might lose, and on fear of non-existence, things that are really unnecessary. Like at OSP the other night, somebody said, give us a teaching from one of those scriptures. So I took the Avadhuta Gita and said, Om pramadina nasandeyaha kim karishyami vrittiman utpadyante vilyante buddhascha yata jale. Buddhas is bubbles, and yata is jale is water, jala. So the implication is ignorance is unreal. Therefore, how can it cause you any real doubt? That's a non-dual teaching. It goes straight to the heart without mentioning religious denominations or God or anything. It just like cuts through the curtain of nescience and gives you this idea that all my doubts are based in nothing, in root ignorance. Mula avidya, they call it. Mula avidya, root ignorance. And I'm going to need to bring a torch into that dark cave and light it up. It's been dark for 1,000 years, but when I bring a torch in, the darkness will go away in seconds or less. So that kind of positive attitude, he said down here, is a kind of mental stance, is what the retreat on Thursday through next Monday is all about. Manasana, the positive mental stance. And also the stances that you don't want to take, that you want to do away with. So in terms of brooding and ignorance, then there is fear and doubt. Now let's look here, because we already read Lord Shiva's statement about the curtain of nescience being composed of those three things, and thickened by brooding and thinned by reflection and meditation. So let's look at death first. Curtain of nescience is doubt about what? And or the problem of fear is having to do with fear of death, fear of formlessness, fear of suffering, and fear of other entities. So those four things kind of make up the constituency of fear, the contents. And if you think about them and meditate upon them, you can do away with that fear. If you don't know about them and it's all kind of an amalgam in your mind, psychologists know about this and psychiatrists and therapists on the mental level, it's just kind of an amalgam in the mind. You don't bring it out and put your finger on it, acknowledge it, and then do away with it. The doing away with it is called sadhana. You want to not just acknowledge it and let it lurk there or hide itself again, but actually dissolve it on the spot with your powerful viveka and vairagya. So that has to do with these four kinds of fear. Fear of death is, of course, the great fear, they call it. And it's done away with by comprehending the birthless, deathless nature of the Atman, which is done away with by studying the five sheaths, which then does away with the fact that you think you're the five sheaths, and then you know you're the Atman that infills them. And you know that's birthless and deathless, and you put that all together rationally, practically, and then in a practicable way also you practice it, and then you realize it. So it's the manana nididhyasana. Shravana, manana, nididhyasana is called the three proofs of truth. First you hear it, then you study it, and then you meditate on it, and you do away with it. So this happens to be why Shankara says you must have willpower around this. You must be able to put your mind on it and watch it dissolve. Things that happen to you on the pranamaya kosha, manomaya kosha, and vijnanamaya kosha level, energy, mind, and intellect, often go on without your knowledge. Karma is like that. Purification is like that. Things get purified and you don't see them go away. Holy Mother says it's like getting on a train in Calcutta and falling asleep on the way to Benares. You don't see any of the countryside go by, but you wake up in Benares nonetheless. So spiritual awakening is like that. You don't see any of the impurities and problems go away. But if you're doing the practice, you'll wake up one day and, like the line of the song in India, my doubt, my ignorance is gone, utterly gone. Who can contain the truth? Who can keep a blazing fire tied in a cotton cloth? So this blazing fire of Brahman, of truth, and its recognition, pratyabhikya, and then its incorporation into your thinking process and at all levels, from food all the way up to your ego, the five sheaths, does away with fear and of these things, fear of death. Fear of formlessness is something you have to sort of get used to by degrees. Like your deep sleep state, if you become cognizant of it, you'll begin to wonder why you feel so good there. But then when you sit down for meditation and you have a chance for formlessness, you wonder why you're in abject fear of it. I'm going to die. I'm going to lose my life if I go into this higher state that's presenting itself to me right now. Because you're in tamas right then. Your mind is in a kind of tamasic cycle. But in another meditation a month later, you can encounter that same opportunity in sattva and you say, this is welcome. I want to go into this. You have no thought of death or fear whatsoever. So your deep sleep state's one of the benefits of studying it, is you feel very good there. In fact, you feel peaceful. And when you're yanked out of it by buzzsaws and traffic and screaming children or whatever wakes you up in the morning, and you wish you could fall back into it. You see, it was so peaceful, and they say 20 minutes of deep sleep will set you up for the next 24 hours. Rather, 8 hours of dreaming will run you ragged. So you get a real deep repose there in deep sleep. And the afternoon nap is actually a Western version of built upon that same precept. You see, I'm just going to lay down here a second, because usually, psychologically you settle yourself in for the night, put the covers over you, lay down. I'm going to get 6-8 hours. Or the yogi thing, I'm going to get 2 hours. That's a long time. See, whatever the case may be, you've psychologically set yourself in for dreaming, for long periods of dreams, for the waking state to suggest itself again on the dreaming state, because they mirror each other. And they're both dreams. Waking state is dream number 2, Ramana Maharshi said. So psychologically, you've put yourself into that mindset, but an afternoon nap you haven't. I'm just going to sit down here really quick, lay down on the couch or on the floor or whatever, and go and then wake up, So you don't usually remember any dreams, or if you do, they're very powerful dreams that suggest themselves. So it's how you psychologically set it all up as you go through these 3 phases of your consciousness. Now you can also psychologically, that is yoga psychology, set yourself up to have powerful dreams and to have conscious deep sleep. It's a mental asana, like we're studying this weekend. You actually take it on like you would a mantra, and you just situate yourself in that. And you say, this is going to be my foundation of meditation, my alambana, they call it in yoga, for the next 24 hours or the next week or a month. It's sort of like studying a sloka, a scripture, sloka by sloka. I'll take 1 sloka a day, they say, see. So you're taking a mental asana a day or a month, and you extract the essence out of that, and then you can take a higher stance, higher mental asana. And as you actually encounter these mental asanas, you do away with ones that you didn't know were there. Sort of like, if you meditate on water, you might come upon your fear of water. And then you'll come upon, why do I fear water? And then you'll realize you had a lifetime where you drowned. See? Again, my 2 Labradors when I was younger, you see, one would jump right in the water, even in like the horrific 8 to 10 foot shore break at Waimea Bay, you see, in Hawaii. The other one would just not go in. See, one was absolutely fearless, the other had fear. Those little doggy psyches of theirs were remembering, not consciously, but they had that fear in them of being a dolphin maybe in a previous lifetime, or dying a horrible drowning death, you see, in a lower life form. So that suggests itself on their mind, and it's why they act the way they do. It's called a samskara, a mental impression that's been run into the mind stuff, the chitta. And that's part of what you get rid of when you meditate, as part of the process of deconditioning yourself in Buddhism, is by, you usually water the flowers and not the weeds, but you do have to encounter the weeds and know they're there, and some weeds are more difficult to get rid of than others, so you have to maybe pull those out by the roots. But whatever the case, this fear of formlessness then can be gotten rid of by assuming formlessness, and the closest thing we know to that is deep sleep. That is, ordinary people, they might be able to comprehend it through deep sleep. The rest of us have heard that Brahman is formless, Allah is formless, God Almighty is formless, Buddha nature is formless, it's empty, and so forth. And all we need to do is get rid of these intimations of the veils of nescience that are there, which keep us from absolutely being 100% assured of that fact. Doubt, right? We're getting to it. Ignorance is unreal, therefore how can it cause any real doubt? So you have to get rid of one of the underpinnings, and the other one will start crumbling. See, pretty soon the whole curtain of nescience may rise or thin out, and that's when you get a vision. A seer gets a vision when the curtain of nescience thins. Swamiji put it, we never get a glimpse of our deep nature. It's like looking at the top of an ocean. You never see the beds of coral and pearls in the bottom. But when every once in a while in a storm, the ocean swells and there's a deep depression of one wave, and you catch a glimpse of the coral and the pearls down there. See? Now that's that curtain of nescience thinning, so that you get this. And sometimes it happens through horrific experiences. You have these near-death experiences, yes, but even experiences that really depress you, like, say, Buddha and Ram going outside of the castle walls of their rich families and seeing real suffering for the first time in their teens. They never knew what it was, you see. And that's like, wow, that just, you get a glimpse of that, and through that, you're going to get a powerful experience. The negative will introduce the positive. It's the old, what is it, clouds are thickest before the dawn or something. It's one of those sayings anyway, in the West. light is, darkness is always thickest before the dawn, or something like that, isn't it? So it's the same here in spiritual life, in the inner realms. Fear of suffering, of course, there in most people, some people to a really intense degree. Other people can bear their suffering so naturally as if they're not even suffering. But some are running away from their suffering, and they usually do that by seeking pleasure. So the teaching in yoga is raga dvesha. Raga dvesha. You see, it's like raga, attraction, dvesha, aversion. So it's almost like saying pleasure and pain. So it's one of the root dualities of ignorance. And so people will be averse to something, and so they'll get attracted to another thing, and that's how they try and play the two off against each other. You know, the whole thing has a kind of deceiving appearance in today's religion. When you talk about heaven and hell, oh, I think I'll go to heaven and then I'll avoid hell. But that's, you know, you're still talking about worlds of name and form when you go from heaven to earth to hell. And the Indian teachings want you beyond heaven, earth, and hell, because that's transmigration of soul. Soul's going places when the soul doesn't go anywhere. Ultimately, where's the place where the soul will go to when all of space is in the soul? Where's the time when the soul will come and go when all of time is in the soul? Vivekananda put it so beautifully. Time and space are in you, and you've projected them, and then you get out there and you forget that you projected them, and then you muck about in them, you see, and create karmas and suffer. The whole thing is retractable. I take it back. You see. Like going to Lord Brahma, take it back. See. I didn't mean to really fall that low. Like Ramakrishna said, rainwater seeks the lowest place to settle. Your mind is like rainwater. What's the way then, Master? They ask him. Make your mind like a hot air balloon instead of rainwater. Fill it with the helium of Dharma and just watch it rise back to its true nature, you see. Mind is the gateway to heaven or the doorway to hell, he said. Your choice. But it's important to know that you're the one that's using it, and God and devil have nothing to do with it. Heaven and hell are in it, you see. It's your choice. All the time it's your choice. The teaching of karma, that's its best attribute, is that it makes you in charge of things. Takes it away from other entities that probably have nothing to do with it. And fear of other entities. Everyone knows what that's about. Everyone's feared society at one time or another, even to go out in it or to be subject to its ills. But there's also a kind of entity on the inner plane, wrathful deities and ancestors and so forth, dark souls and bhutas in the Bhutakasha, like ghosts and spirits that are, easily feared. So you're going to have to build up a curtain of Dharma, you see, like your dream, right? You said about, so you must have built up that defense against all encroachments on the Dharma. Like there's a beautiful song by Ramprasad where he says, the mind is like it's like a young tree, and it fears being eaten by calves and trodden on by elephants. So fence that tree around. Fence the tree of your mind around with the fence of Kali, 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 the fiery fence of Kali, 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 and watch the tree grow. And then you can tie an elephant to it later, no problem. And as I know by my own cows out back that my landlord owns, you see, they try and eat the leaves, but they can't reach them. They've grown so tall that the branches are above their reach. So they stretch out their neck, and their tongue comes out about 1.5 feet. Remember how cows had a tongue that long? And it curls around an avocado leaf and pulls the branch down. And they try a few times and fail.
Giraffes came from.
That's where giraffes came from, right? Develop that longer neck to reach the trees. So there are persistent things like that are in the realm of fear of other entities and so forth. You want to be over them. Let's look quickly then at doubt. Doubt about what? About divine reality, about its existence. Brahman is existence. If you could put it all to rest, not whether it exists or doesn't exist, but it is existence. It's everything that exists all the time. It's just a matter of whether it has form or it's gone into a formless state, but it's always existing all the time, either in seed or not, or form and formlessness. So that's the next one, doubt about formlessness. Again, just like you had fear of formlessness, you might even have doubt as you practice formlessness that there is such a thing as formlessness, or that when you do go formless, it's not just an empty void. But as I was saying yesterday, we know the void is not empty because we were there to see it and give it a name. Otherwise we wouldn't know of it. So your Saksha Hamkara, you see, your witness ego, ripe ego, came upon it. So, oh, that's interesting. Look at that big void. Just like a scientist looking at the void of space. And he's the witness, and there's it's the seer and the seen happening all over again on different levels. So in the case of spiritual life, the seer is the seer of all phenomena, and the seen is all phenomena. In this case, then, you remove your doubt about formlessness by being conscious of being the witness of phenomena. Sakshi Bhutam, the witness of all phenomena. You have doubt about the purpose of life, or the meaning of life and so forth. So you're going to have to develop dharmic life, divine life, or eternal life to disprove that and to destroy that doubt. Actually, some of the conventional religious teachings are God has a meaning for your life, but when you get beyond moral and ethics, and you hear in the Dharma, God isn't in the world. The world is in God. And that God is you. It's all back inside of yourself. And you'll have to reach formlessness to know that. There is a God of form. We call it Ishvara, or Buddha, Christ, Jesus, Muhammad. There are exemplars of God with form. And there's also a formless reality that they talk about beyond my Almighty Father in heaven and so forth. So the God of formlessness then suggests itself to you. Maybe in the meantime you're going to have to find out that there is really no purpose to life. It's all empty. But as Sri Ramakrishna said, it's all zeros. Your cars, your relationships, your family, your money is all zeros. And it adds up to nothing in the end. But if you put the one in front of that line of zeros, it's a huge number. So you always have to put the knowledge of oneness in front of it all, or the knowledge of not two-ness, as we were saying, and then make sense and find the real meaning in all the zeros. That is, the zeros in and of themselves are not much. And they can also lead to bondage and suffering and rebirth. But if they're placed in a dharmic setting, then you're rich. Ram Prasad has a beautiful song where he sings that. "O Divine Mother, make me rich with all the wealth of your divine kingdoms." He wants to own it all. He's tasted a little bit of the Dharma, and that was very pleasing. Now he wants to have it all. Now there's also doubt about the presence of Maya. That's easy. Most people don't even know there's such a thing as Maya. Name, form, time, space, and causality is Maya. Nama, Rupa, Desha, Kala, Nimitta. So most people don't think about those things like they don't think about raising their arm, what the power is, or how they see, how they think. They don't know about the prana, and they don't know about the mind being different than the brain, those kinds of key teachings in Vedanta. So obviously they're not going to know about the presence of Maya. And Maya is not a sentient evil in our tradition. It's an insentient, natural presence. They call it the covering power, actually. She leads you with one hand and blinds your eyes with the other. So Maya is always doing that to people. But there are some people who say, tear Maya away from the view, thin the curtain of nescience. And then they see where they're going, like in deep sleep or in spiritual life. They can actually see where they're going. If thine eye be single, you shall be able to see the truth and know it. So you can thin the presence of Maya just like you can thin the curtain of nescience. However, Maya is not something that will ever go away. It's neither real, nor is it unreal, nor is it a combination of real and unreal, nor is it neither. That's how Shankara put it. In other words, it's just inscrutable. You don't want to study it like you wouldn't want to study a fog bank from inside the fog bank. You'd want to get on a nearby hill, you see. And if you ask me, we are studying it in science and so forth. We're studying Maya from inside Maya with a mind that's born in Maya, that doesn't know about the presence of Maya. So when you find out about the presence of Maya, maybe that doubt is a good doubt. You know the 3 pillars of Zen, right? 3 pillars of Zen. So they're based upon spiritual awakening. But when you get to that 3rd pillar, you think this is going to be transcendence. But actually it's called the great doubt. 3rd pillar of Zen is the great doubt. Now you have a doubt about everything that you accepted before. It's very healthy, spiritually speaking. It's like that emptiness again. And you're going to have to doubt the existence of everything before you come to the fullness of God is existence, or God is Buddha nature in that case. Busho, they call it in Zen. So we could go on and on about the presence of Maya. I could show you the 16 evolutes of Maya and 8 more evolutes of Maya on a cosmic level, and we could talk about it. Suffice to say that to recognize it is to come to understand that you need to view it from a distance. You see? And you can study it from a distance, but you must recognize it and extract yourself from it. Name, form, time, space, and causation, karma. You need to extract yourself from it. You can't do much inside of it. Like Einstein saying, you know, problems created on one level have to be solved on a higher level. They can't be solved on that same level that you created them. Same in spiritual life, pretty much. You created a karma on one level, and you're trying to get at it on this same level, trying to annul it. But you're going to have to rise to a different perspective to deal with that karma, especially if it's a nasty one, or if it's become an impression in your mind from a previous lifetime. How are you going to deal with it from a previous lifetime? You have to deal with it from this lifetime, and your perspective is going to have to change. Your mental asana is going to have to change. And then you can do away with it quite easily, thank you very much, and be done with it for all time. Doubt about the emptiness of form. And of course, that's a very good teaching pretty much about objects. As I said earlier, objects are empty of the ability to fulfill you. And objects are empty of any real substance. There is an essence underlying them, but there's no substance in the thing itself, and so it cannot satisfy you. Those are the 2 great teachings in Buddhism and Vedanta about form. And through that, you might get to that Diamond Sutra teaching. Emptiness is form, and form is emptiness. Then you can take the 2 and put them together and render them into one indivisible state, as Shankara says. Let's look then at ignorance. Now you see, waking, dreaming, and deep sleep run throughout all of these until you get to Turiya, which is Om, or Sri Devi, the mother. So ignorance is there at the bottom left corner. Ignorance of what? Ignorance of your true self is probably the first and most primal of all ignorance. We call it Atman, or the saying Zen calls it Busho. There's different names for it, but it's an indivisible, all-pervasive self, like this Paramahamkara here that we were talking about. All-pervasive is the best word in English because it intimates that it's there, unchangeable. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, smoke will stain a window, but it won't stain the screen. It blows right through. So he's talking about that ego that doesn't hold on to anything, and the vicissitudes and vagaries of the world can't stain it. It just flow right through you. See, bird flies through the sky and leaves no trace, and so there are different teachings Ramakrishna used to try and convey that in a simple way. Now there's also another ignorance of non-dual truth. Perhaps you've gotten attached to worldliness. Perhaps you've gotten attached to secular knowledge. Perhaps you've gotten attached to intellectual knowledge alone. So you have no idea that there's something called spiritual wisdom from the scriptures, say. You've looked maybe into the fundamental scriptures, but you haven't looked into the non-dual scriptures yet. There's a really big teaching around that, which I gave in 2 prisons over the last week, and gave them a whole list of examples of the revealed scriptures. Ashtavakra Samhita, Avadhuta Gita, Adhyatma Ranayana, Gaudapadaskarika, the Upanishad, on and on about these fat trimmed off the bone scriptures, where you don't hear anything about God, or God as consciousness, or God and consciousness as the relationship between Brahman and Atman, and the relationship between Atman and the Jivatman, the embodied soul. That's all you hear about. And they're giving you those teachings to remove the line of distinction between all those. So you can say, I and my Father are one at the end of your life, and go into the conscious death in that superior mental asana. See? So, doubt about the non-dual, ignorance of the non-dual truth will be there until you plumb the depths of that and begin to open up those nadis that lead to it. See? Again, it's sort of like creating the possibility for a higher perspective so your energy can flow there and occupy it. You're trying to do it without that happening. It's just imagination on your part, or hope. And hope is my least favorite of qualities. Who said that? Vivekananda. My least favorite of qualities, hope. In a last-ditch effort, you're clinging to some hope. All right, I'll give it to you. But the noble soul that knows everything, has everything, and is everything should never have to rely on hope. And in fact, doubt, ignorance, and fear should not be there in that soul. In its natural state, they're not. So get back to its natural state and do away with those things. You can do it. You can do it, as my Hungarian nephew says. How about ignorance of a series of births? That's, like I said, that's lower Zen, lower realization, lower Satori in Zen, but it's still a very powerful shift for most people, that there is more than one lifetime. Many of us are living still inside that box, that we only live once. It's not actually a bad mental asana to take if you're working on yourself. There can be a sort of distraction that happens if you start talking about different lifetimes. Kind of take yourself away from this one. And the same, that's living in the past, but the same happens living in the future. You can say, I'm going to have better lifetimes later, and then just not work on this one. It's hope, right? So you want to, if you insist that you only live once, then make it your best lifetime and reach enlightenment right now, right here, right now. Because enlightenment is here, right now. And the post-mortem emancipation will not help you in that case. So, but on the other hand, becoming aware of a series of births, if you're having problems right now with things that don't seem to make sense, why are these karmas rising in me? Why have I got these impediments? Why can't I make spiritual progress? Why can't I meditate, and so forth? You might want to start concentrating, like the yogis tell you, on your past lifetimes. Krishna says he knows all his. He tells Arjuna on the battlefield, you don't know yours yet, but when you do, you'll solve a lot of these questions you're asking me. And I know all mine. Because I was taught this wisdom by an ancient seer. And he mentions the name of the seer, and Arjuna says, he lived like 1,000 years ago in India, And how did he teach you? He says, well, I've had many lifetimes, and so have you, but I know all mine. So he's brought from lifetimes ago, Krishna, every time he's brought forward, say every 700 years like a wooden statue, and he comes out of his wooden statue phase, he brings forth that wisdom with it and gives it to people. It's his purpose. He says, I come to resurrect the new Dharma, do away with the old Dharma. That's why I come from age to age. It's the main reason. The second reason is to show myself to the devotees. because they need to get rid of this doubt of form and formlessness and God and not God and so forth. They need to see a soul who's living in the Dharma and living a divine life, and is living in that innate perfection. All right, spiritual discrimination. Do you have ignorance about the need for that? Viveka was what Swami named himself after. Swamiji, we call him. So that's that, separating the wheat from the chaff. And it's very necessary to have a true spiritual life. You might say the practice phase of spiritual life begins with the dawning of Viveka. But real spiritual life begins with the experience that happens after you have spiritual Viveka. In other words, samadhi. That's where doubts and fear and ignorance will really start to disappear, because you'll have the experience yourself. Some people have never heard of milk. Other people have heard of it but never tasted it. Others have tasted it. And some own a dairy. See? So those people who have never heard of it, see, they're not going to understand anything about it, because even in their past lifetimes they never sought it out. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, some people never think about God even by accident. That's pretty pathetic, you see, even by accident. It's not like you're walking around one day and all of a sudden, I wonder if there's a God. Some people never even get that far. But those people who have heard of milk are striving, maybe, and they get a taste of it and they want the whole dairy. So they want to be rich with the whole land of wisdom. Now that I've uncovered the Dharma, I want it all. I want to live in it always, until I enter formlessness, when even Dharma will be no good to me anymore. See? Thorn in my flesh is called ignorance. Knowledge, take another thorn called knowledge from the same bush, pull out the thorn of ignorance and toss them both away. That's truth. You must know that there's an end to knowledge in truth. Who said that? Sri Krishna in the Gita. You must know, Arjuna, that there's an end to knowledge in truth. So there should be an end to ignorance in knowledge. But he's jumping towards this higher spiritual discrimination. He knows that even beyond the duality of knowledge and ignorance, as considerable as that is non-dual truth. And it's an experience that the seers live in. All right, penultimate, the last two here, ignorance of Dharma or divine life. And of course we already pretty much covered that, because if you're into spiritual discrimination, you know there's such a thing as Dharma, and if you find the Dharma, you want to share it with others. And that's one of the great sacrifices Jnana Yagya, that I started off the class this morning with, that Krishna says this is one of the greatest of all sacrifices, is to learn this knowledge and share it with others. For the householder, that's going to be to his children, his or her children, and for the guru and so forth, that's going to be to the Sangha. And for the masters and past masters, that's going to be into the scriptures. Shankara wrote like a dozen scriptures in his life before he passed away at 32. He was enlightened by the time he was 12. He knew all the scriptures of India at the time he was 10, by memory. I think that's not possible. But then you see Swami Sheshananda some 20 years ago, and he's reciting the entire Gita to you in Sanskrit and English while you take prasad. So you realize it is possible. Holy Mother's one of my favorite stories. A man has a young calf, rancher, can't walk to the field, picks it up, takes it to the field so it can eat. And it develops legs over days. He still comes, takes it to the field, takes it back to the barn at night. And they just develop this symbiotic relationship where it happens. It's part of the daily routine that he picks it up and takes it to eat and takes it back to the barn. So a couple years later, someone's visiting the ranch and they see this man walking by with a 200-pound bull, 2,000-pound bull, depositing it in the pasture, and then at night picking it back. And he said, "How did you do that?" A little a day. In fact, he didn't even know he was doing it. He was developing muscles that he never knew he had. And if he did it every day, there was no stress to it. It just was a natural thing. He could adjust to it little by little. You get the gist. So And that way, these things that are seemingly impossible become possible. Dharmic life and divine life not only become possible, they become extremely desirable for you. And worldly life fades to the back. The closer you go to Brahman, the more worldly life leaves you. Until you're thinking, there's Brahman in the world now. Then the second kind of Zen, third deepest kind of Zen, is there's only Brahman now. That is, there's only Buddha nature. And the world has gone away. Then after that, they both go away. And there's just whatever. I mean, it sounds a little bit flippant, but basically they call it nothingness, and then nothingness beyond nothingness after that. So you get the idea is that there's still a little bit of distinction in there when you're saying Brahman exists and the world doesn't. Then there comes a stage when Brahman is so natural to you that it's like you can't say anything about it. You can't think about it. It's just your natural state. Well, that's divine life. And that's why they won't really name God or talk about God. Holy Mother used to say they'd come and ask her questions. And the questions would be about their troubles. And the questions would be about their spiritual practice, mantra. But then she'd get a question about non-duality. She said, you can't talk about that. You can't talk about Brahman like you would talk about greens and fish in a marketplace. So, that's more for your formless contemplations, you see, your meditations. You approach without a tongue, without a mouth, into that periphery, without your senses, bereft of senses, like deep sleep again. Finally, you have ignorance of the revealed scriptures and the teacher. That, of course, we want to bring back to the West, which is why we're here doing it as SRV associations and supporting it as we saw it in our teachers, Swami Sheshananda here in Portland and his teacher, Holy Mother, and how they did it since Sri Ramakrishna's life, 1800s. And keep that Guru Parampara, that transmission going on, keep the Dharma in the world as a sort of sacrifice, no matter what other things you're doing in life. So you're raising children, going to work and all that, you'll keep increasing this and you'll keep driving it. I always think about when I drive over the new bridge in San Francisco on the way to see you here in Portland, how they drove those pylons into the riverbed in the mud for the new bridge, and then pretty soon it started wavering, so they had to redo it, you see. So I always think about that. You have to drive these pylons, or these huge metal pillars, deep into the mud of your mind, sink them as deep as they can go, so all of the cars of your thoughts can pass across them, you see, and without it wavering or shaking, or like the old bridge gave way once recently and dumped cars into the bay, you see. That's why they were building the new one. So it's like Dharma, you just need to refresh it from age to age. That's up to the seers, the great souls. And you also need to drive it into your mind every day to keep that, this is like Sri Ramakrishna used to say that the lotus blooms in the sun, but its roots are in the mud, So that's that kind of dichotomy between human soul and God, and world and God, and so forth. You're down here in the mud, as it were, of earth. And but we have to make sure that our consciousness is that bloom, you see, that's above the waterline of Maya and far beyond the mud of suffering and all that, the things that can happen to us. So that's pretty much running through the cloud of nescience teaching. Cloud of unknowing teaching in the Buddhist sense more than the Christian sense, and the curtain of nescience teaching that we would find in Tantra and Vedanta. Just knowing about it gives you a hand up, an advantage over others, that you could possibly thin that out by not brooding. It's a great teaching. Just don't brood about anything. That's why I came up with that teaching. The worst waste of time is brooding. Reflecting, contemplating, meditating, those are all fine. See, cogitating, ruminating. You can make a chart of different kinds of aidings, you see. But brooding is not allowed. You just tell your mind that. It's a waste of time, pure and simple. And basically, it connects with past, present, and future in doubt and ignorance and fear. You're brooding on the past and the present and the future. And or say you're brooding on the past and you're worried about the future and fear of the future, and so your present isn't stable. You never get respite. You never get chance. How are you going to meditate on God or inspect your deep sleep state if you don't have solid ground there, dharmic ground to build your house on, bedrock instead of sand, as Christ said. So there's one quote at the top here we can read. When meditation, with all its facets and emanations, is engaged in devoid of full awareness, stripped of the knowledge of the self within, then the universe and space and time rises out of nescience, which is root ignorance. But if the true nature of all things is known prior to embodiment in the three worlds, the entire affair becomes nothing other than Brahman, as Lord Vishishta tells the young Ram in the Yoga Vishishta. Again, when meditation with all its facets and emanations is engaged in devoid of full awareness, then, and stripped of knowledge of the self, then the universe and space and time rises out of this curtain of nescience, and you see nothing beyond it. In fact, you're preoccupied with only one side of the curtain, and don't even know about the curtain itself. It's that kind of double jeopardy of Maya. You see, double Maya on you. But then, if you engage in all things prior to embodiment, as if you've past lifetimes again realized the self, or striven to know the Dharma in a previous lifetime, you'll come forth again, as Krishna says in the Gita, with the thread of your yoga in hand, and just wait and see. You see, pay a little debt to society, then you're right on your dharmic path again. I had to pay for 19 years. As soon as I was 20, it was yoga, it was practice, it was scriptures, and never looking back, you see, never looking back. Didn't like the whole thing when I first got into it. Or as Groucho Marx once said, I've been saying since they first commenced it, I'm against it. He sang that, actually. So I didn't like what I was seeing in this world. It was, shall I read Urasaba's advice to his children again? You lazy things, get up. It won't do. It's piggish to live a piggish life. And that's the exact expression Holy Mother used in regard to those women who were having so many children and not teaching them and having some of them die and suffering one day. And she also used to say, you know why the female crab never comes out of its hole in the sand? Because of its progeny. So it never comes out. Male crab might come out, you see, and grab a few bits and throw them down the hole to eat. So come up out of that hole and in the sand, you see, and see the sunshine and the ocean and smell the breeze, and live a life which is beneficial to yourselves and to others, as we say in the chants. So there is curtain of nescience chant, and I think in the time remaining, which is about 15 minutes, we have just enough time to look into this part of the sloka which says, verily the thought comes, why have I not done the right thing? Why have I done wrong? This does not torment the wise soul, these two questions. But of course for others it would. So you might want to look at the Dharma Shrama in India to back off from this kind of very causal level of curtain of nescience to a more practical hands-on teaching, and change the atmosphere to find out what we really can do, and based on an ancient system that undoubtedly has become somewhat in disrepute and fallen from its original stance over several thousand years. In fact, probably 2,000 years is when it started to fall apart, 2,000 years ago, according to Vivekananda. But for thousands of years it was in full swing. It was probably the best world system we've ever seen for a society, and the Dharma was being given through it. That's why they call it Dharma Shrama. So in line with that statement, if If to remind myself about it again, if mentation, if you undertake mentation in life, stripped of devoid of the knowledge of Dharma, then it's going to result in negativity. But if you enter into the body with this knowledge and teach it to your children, then you'll have poison instead of nectar, as they say. So let's see what that kind of awareness can do. The first quote is, celibate student, honest merchant, retired forest dweller, and renounced freedom-seeking soul. These 4 stages of life are well known among those who value dharmic living. So the Dharma is for all of them. Now you see, first, the celibate student is there called the Brahmacharya. And that's also one of the yamas of yoga, if you remember. First 5 precepts of yoga is Brahmacharya. You live a celibate life, very pure life, very dedicated life. And you're usually using that purity to study the Dharma. And your guru or your parents, quite often your parents would give you away to the guru at that stage. You wouldn't even live at home. And you would go get firewood and you'd knock on the door of the neighborhood teacher, the Kula Guru. And if he saw you standing there with firewood, he'd look at you and, all right, come in, go to the kitchen, help my wife, I'll teach you later. So, the firewood is saying, I want to help serve you. And then if I help serve you, that's my payment, so you'll give me the Dharma. That was just like ordinary. In this day and age, probably the closest thing we have to it is the Tibetan monks going and looking for the next rebirth of Dalai Lama and going to some dharmic hut somewhere, knocking and say, we think the Dalai Lama has incarnated here. Can we have your child? Would you give away your baby like that so easily? Probably not. In America, you'd call for the police or the men in the white coats. But basically in India and in Tibet, that's of great honor to know that you've had a soul like that born to you. And that knowers of the birth-death process have traced a soul like that to your family. And that the family, that great soul has been born to you, like Jesus was to Mary and so forth, Joseph and Mary. So in that case, probably the closest thing we have to kind of understanding what's being said here about the parents just giving the young child away to the guru. No, you go there for a while. We might see you on the street and wave at you, but you're going to live at the house. You're going to take the Dharma. It's still there a little bit, but not in the committed way it was. So Brahmacharya would be that celibate student phase. In the 50s and 60s, when I was a little boy, it was still there somewhat. Not in the spiritual sense, but you kept yourself chaste and you studied, and you were under the thumb of your parents and you minded them. That's not there anymore now. And the kids of today, very, very rare to find obedient children who follow what is best known by the elders. Now, grihastha would be, honest merchant, yes, grihastha, the householder or second stage of life which requires marriage and the inception, rearing, and maintenance of a dharmic family, therefore filling one's duty to society. That's the way they thought of it. And of course it was raising dharmic children in the Dharma, using the money that you gained for supporting the Dharma. The Dharma was in everything, just like sweetness is in sugarcane juice. The Dharma was there in everything. And no one denied it, or no one argued against it, no one rebelled against it. It was just a thing to do for the evolving soul to reach Brahman, which is coming in the sannyasin stage. Now, it should be said here that some souls aren't pinned or restricted to this process. Sannyasins, for instance, you can be born young like Shankara and talk your mother into letting you go. He fell into the jaws of an alligator when he was a boy and was fighting the alligator and used it as an excuse to have to get permission from his mother to let him go into sannyas at 10 years old, leave home, because she wouldn't let him. He was been trying for years to try and wander away from home. Christ just left his parents. He didn't even ask. I must be about my Father's business, and he disappeared. and so did Ramana Maharshi, or current day Indian rishi in the 1900s. So some souls just walk away, but at least Shankara loved his mother enough to say, "Can I go?" And she said no. So he fell into the jaws of an alligator one day into a nearby lake or river, and as that process was going on, his mother came rushing, and Shankara used it as an excuse. He says, "I will be saved from the jaws of this alligator if you let me take sannyas, mother." And she said, "Oh, okay. You can have my kidney." So anyway, the alligator let go. He came out, and then he left home and came back to her only on her deathbed, as the story goes. You can read about Shankara's life. There's one book written by one of the Ramakrishna Order Swamis that all the little incidents of Shankara's life are listed there. Very remarkable life. 32 years. This is around 700 AD. So he's a recent Indian seer. That's recent for India. So anyway, how I got onto that was that there are souls that can transcend the fourfold process at their birth even. They can go straight to sannyas, or maybe straight to forest dweller without having children, if they so want it that way. Maybe they don't want to make money and they can live without money, like we were saying earlier. Yogis just like to give away and don't like to receive or hold. So if they're that kind of soul, they don't have to go through this process again. Just want to make that clear. Now the Vanaprastha is next. We were looking for a word early on in our spiritual life when we were in our 20s that described us, because we were neither householder nor were we monk. And we certainly had passed our student phase behind, and we were in our sadhana phase. And so what are we in the West? That we don't want to marry, we don't have children, we don't want to own land, we don't want the things society wants, or we definitely don't want them in the adharmic way. They come to us, we'll do it in the Dharma. But the word came Vanaprasthan, people who are older Vedantists, for instance, in our Ramakrishna family. Extended Ramakrishna family is about 5 or 6 million now. Since he was on earth in the 1800s, that's a lot of souls coming to the Dharma and to enlightenment rather than just salvation, we say. So in that extended family here in the West, in present times, there were people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s who had either not had children or had children who had already grown up and gone away. And they weren't monks. They weren't inclined yet to a monk, and they couldn't just leave the world and wander off. Probably run into barbed wire fences in America if you do that. And mad farmers with shotguns carrying bulls 2,000 pounds. So Vanaprasthan was the word that came. A third stage of dharmic life which ensues after family life is consummated, in most cases, consisting of retiring into the forest to pursue studies, devotional exercises, and meditation. I mean, you would, if you had a wife or a husband still, and you were a Vanaprasthan, you would go into the forest and build your own hut with sticks and leaves and so forth. And you'd go in there and you'd get ready for death, basically. And of course, you'd be studying to get enlightenment, hopefully before that happened. Or maybe it would happen at the time of death, like the Tibetan Buddhists say. That's a time when you'll see the Buddha light. Or, preparing yourself as well as possible for the eventuality of death and coming back in a conscious way. That was all part of the whole Dharma ashrama, you see. It's the way they thought. We have to understand this in the West. To us, that's odd, or something. For most people, I'm sure the people in this room don't think it's odd, but we have to understand it ourselves and pass it on to others. The many lifetime scenario and karma and samskara, impressions in the mind, these are things that are not in the minds of other people. 95% of them, see, of the human beings on earth. How many is it? 10, 11 billion now? But 5 million Ramakrishna devotees know about it, and other followers of other dharma ashramas. So we have to make room for that in our nadis. We have to, in our minds, and have nadis leading to it, that the Dharma ashrama is not an old, outdated thing. It might have fallen apart in India and turned into some pretty nasty things like hurt a widow and child marriage and things. But basically, it had its heyday and it was very powerful. And we have our own kind of caste system here in the West, by the way. You know, usually judged by money: poor, middle class, rich. You know, filthy rich. That's the 4 ashramas here, right? It's not the Dharma ashram, it's the Dana ashram. It's like money, all based in money. But anyway, there is a semblance, of course, of still student phase and merchant phase and forest dweller phase. You know, just a few of us really, we were thinking. What's the name for us? And it has to be a doorway to sannyas. You know, you can't sometimes come out of family life and money and all that, just go straight to sannyas. I know a few souls who have, a couple swamis in the Ramakrishna order even, who had an occupation up to a certain point and just went straight to sannyas from there. And so possibly they were living a kind of forest dweller life before they did. Anyway, you get the idea. Sannyasin here says, the final and highest stage of dharmic life entailing the renunciation of all earthly affairs in order to pursue moksha, spiritual emancipation. Moksha is a freedom that's always at hand, by the way. It's not something you gain. But you're pursuing it nonetheless. That is, your soul is already free and you're trying to realize it. It's not like I'm going to realize something that wasn't realized before. But it's fully realized in you. It's like saying Kundalini Shakti. They say she rises from center to center. That's not really true. She's at all centers already. It's you that's rising to center to center. It's your awareness that's rising. It's like saying the expansion of consciousness. That's a stupid saying. See, consciousness can't expand, but the mind can expand in its ability to understand the non-expansive or fully expansive consciousness, you see. The thing is already there. It's already for granted, you know, in this way of thinking. And you're growing into it. It's stations you take on and evacuate. And quite often when you evacuate them, you don't destroy them. You take them with you. See, lust, anger, greed, and envy, you don't ever get rid of them. You take them with you. You started out lusting for wealth, and you end up lusting for God. It's all. It's just you sublimate things. It's a tantric way, particularly, but it happens in Vedanta and yoga too. Well, we have a few minutes left, so to finish up this chart, you see here Sri Krishna's teachings in the Gita around this. Whatever you do, whatever you sacrifice, whatever austerity you practice, whatever you eat, whatever you gift away, do it as an offering to me. Thus shall you be set free from actions yielding good and bad results. It's a beautiful sloka in the Gita that pretty much covers your acts in all 4 stages here. It doesn't matter what stage you're in, you're doing it all as an offering or sacrifice to the Lord, which is how I started off this class today, talking about sacrifice, and particularly wisdom sacrifice that we're engaging in right now, and which we are concluding now for this visit, this Dharma visit of mine to the Portland ashram. So let's end here with a chant and move on towards next weekend's retreat. Remember, live streaming audience, no live streaming classes next week unless you come on retreat with us, and you'll be there live. So, and then, of course, watch for us back in Hawaii 2 weekends after that, when we'll be taking up a new set of live streaming classes for all of you. Om Asato, Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya, Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya, Mrichor Ma Amritam Gamaya, Abira Abira Mayeti, Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukam, Tenamam Tahinicham, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from darkness to light, from lower truth to higher truth, from the unreal to the real, and from the illusion of death to eternal life. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hare